Hi everyone. So welcome to the three phases of colonialism in India. And the third phase is called the investment capital phase. The time period is 1858 to 1947. That is till the time that India became independent. It has some important topics that we'll be looking at. For example, how Indian capitalists were also coming up. So it wasn't just British capitalists, but then we'll see how much they flourished during this period. Trade unionism, how that was developing in different parts of the world, and that sort of impacted where investments could be made by flourishing capitalists. The Meiji Restoration, which is something that happened in Japan. It's a very interesting sequence of events and has very important lessons for how we view modernization. And we'll also look at the development of postal services in India. Reason being, so this happened in the previous phase that we spoke about, which is the laissez-faire, but because we could not cover it in yesterday's lesson, we have put it in today's. Now, there were major changes that were happening in the world economy. The three major ones, the first one was that by the time the third stage of colonialism in India came to be, by this time other countries of Western Europe and North America had undergone industrialization and were now in a position to challenge the monopoly of Britain. So this is something that was very threatening to Britain as well. Secondly, several major technological developments had occurred from the last quarter of the 19th century as a result of the application of scientific knowledge to industry. So you had in front of you the modern steel industry, which was followed by chemical industries, and later on the use of electricity for industrial purposes. So, rapid industrialization was leading to rapid urbanization, and a continuous growth of urban population obviously needed more and more food. So, what was happening is there was an extensive search for new and secure sources of raw material for manufacture and food stuff as well. And this was gathering momentum among the industrialized countries. And where were they looking? They were mostly looking for these resources in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The third thing that happened is the development of trade and industry and extended continuous exploitation of colonies and colonial markets led to unlimited accumulation of capital in the capitalist industrial countries. Now, how this happened is that when the capital was accumulated and concentrated among a few capitalists, there were very few banks and corporations. Okay, and there was a great deal of opportunity for investment of this capital in their own countries also. So it's not like they had no option but to invest in India. But what was happening? The working class in these countries were gradually being organized and their bargaining power was increasing. So this meant lower profits in one's own country, and therefore colonies were becoming the effective choice. Now let me explain this a bit further through Hobson's view. Hobson pointed out that there was sufficient scope for British capital to be invested in Britain itself, but this was not done. Because from the 1840s, the British labour were coming under the increasing influence of the trade union movement and had developed considerable bargaining power with respect to wages vis-a-vis the capitalists. So this challenge did not confront British capitalists in India because in India, Indian labour was accepting low wages as well. Now, why were Indian labour accepting low wages, you might ask? So, the first thing is that commercialization of agriculture had happened. There was de-peasantization. People were moving away from agriculture as well. A lot of them no longer possessed land that was proving to be profitable and so on. So, they had no other option. Within India, there was a lot of deindustrialization, deurbanization. They did not know what else to do. The third thing was that labor among themselves were divided on the basis of caste and religion. So the sort of united front that was needed to be put against the British, even when it came to bargaining for wages, could not be advanced. And for maximum profit, goods were being made here and not in Britain. So all these factors contributed to this, and when workers get an opportunity and when they have that sort of power to ask for more and more wages, capitalists are obviously not happy about it. आपको ये समझना होगा इनफैक्ट कि जब हम क्लास स्ट्रगल की बात करते हैं मार्क्सिज्म में, और कम्युनिस्ट मैनिफेस्टो में जब इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन की बात हुई है तो उसके पीछे एक बहुत बड़ा कारण यही था कि अगर वर्कर्स बहुत एम्पावर हो गए तो कैपिटलिस्ट जो हैं आपके, जो बुर्जुआ हैं, दे विल लूज आउट इन द लॉन्ग रन. Then there is a very important work. It's called Private Investment in India by Amir Kumar Bagchi, and he has written very interestingly about things that were happening in India at that point in time. And see, as countries of Western Europe and even Japan had the same objectives as Britain, and they had to pursue the same method as was being done by Britain, a lot of them were moving and scrambling for Africa. Okay, so you need to understand, scramble for Africa here means that everyone is going to places which have more resources, from where they can get cheap labor, cheap raw material, and also places to invest and sell their goods in, create new markets. Now, a bit of a detour, let us look at the Meiji Restoration. So, why are we talking about this? Because I am trying to tell you that apart from Britain, there were several other countries, and not just Western powers, so to speak, that were making significant gains and that were getting industrialized and posing a threat to Britain now, which, you know, influenced their policies to a great extent. So, the Meiji Restoration is called Meiji Restoration because Meiji was actually the name of the king who came to power in Japan, and restoration because it basically put an end to military rule in Japan and it brought back the monarchy and imperialism, and Meiji was the emperor at that time. Again, also it's called restoration because during this period there was a lot of modernization and westernization of the country. Economic development took place. So see, a lot of Japan was still based on agriculture, a lot of its economy was still based on agriculture, but they did go towards industrialization and they did start developing those sort of industries as well, such as strategic industries, transport and communications. So here you will see a bit of a parallel as was happening in India, but of course what is a very important difference? Railways were being developed in India, means of communication were being developed in India, but not keeping Indian interests in mind. This was obviously not the case in Japan. You can hear some birds chirping in the background, which is a nice distraction, I suppose. Okay. Then private firms were also encouraged in Japan, so it was not completely state oriented, and the interests of private firms were also kept in mind. And what made all of this different from the processes that were going on in colonies were that in the Meiji Restoration, the Japanese were very cognizant of the fact that they had to maintain their traditional values as well. And what happened when they did this? They projected a very assertive front, and even Western powers started respecting them and looking upon them as formidable opponents. People who were not aping the West blindly, people who were prospering by adapting and adopting the best methods and the best technology that was being developed, or any kind of development that was happening all across the world, including industrialization, but not doing that blindly and keeping the interests of Japan in mind. Also, let's just quickly see what happened with the postal services before we finish with the investment categories that were there during this phase in India. So, in the postal services, the British established the modern postal system, an effective one, and they also introduced the telegraph. The first telegraph line ran from Calcutta to Agra, opened in 1853. As mentioned before, this was in the previous phase, in the laissez-faire phase. Then Lord Dalhousie introduced postage stamps. Earlier people had to pay in cash when they were sending out letters, and also the rates were very different depending on the distance that was being covered by the letter, but now it was made uniform all over the land. And earlier, in some cases, in fact, the postage on a letter was the equivalent of as much as 4 days' wages of a skilled Indian worker. So you can imagine the sort of discrepancy that existed, and Lord Dalhousie sought to do away with that. So all this as well changed the way communication was happening in India. Then The parliamentary papers that were connected with the objective of British rule in India have made it abundantly clear that the prime focus was on making investment in India. And where was the heaviest investment made? It was made in the railways. Apart from this, there were other categories as well. So, loans were raised by semi-public organizations, mostly for investment in railways, irrigation, development of ports, mining, canal construction, and later on hydroelectric projects as well, and other business investments in India. Amir Bagchi and Daniel Thorner have estimated that before 1914, nearly 97% of the British capital investments in India were for what is today called physical infrastructure, such as the railways, road transport and shipping, bridge building, etc. Then the next head of investment was the mining industry like coal, and the third head was the development of financial houses and institutions such as for banking, finance and insurance. When you take all of these together in the name of modernization, they were primarily calculated to further the exploitation of India's natural and human resources. So, investment was happening, but then it wasn't in India's favor all the time. This is what you need to remember. Furthermore, according to Amir Bagchi, in 1913, foreign banks held over 3/4 of the total bank deposits in India, while Indian banks could attract only 1/4 of the deposits. In Britain, the bankers and financiers, they had an independent origin and development within the framework of capitalism, whereas in India, the bankers emerged from traditional sahukars and mahajans. So again, the system from which they originated was also a bit different. Indian industrialists, now this is important, they were not encouraged either to borrow for setting up industries or to take up any such activity, and if loans were extended, there was heavy discrimination in the rate of interest charged by the British banks. So the sort of development that one would look at in the capital investment phase for even Indian capitalists, that was not happening. Loans for industrialization were given to Indian capitalist entrepreneurs only on the condition that they will purchase the old machinery and industry of the things that had been established by the British in India. In no case a loan could be had for importing machinery from any country, which is a big put off for any industrialist. Restrictions were also placed on the total amount that an Indian entrepreneur could avail of, and it is clear that in all the three stages of colonialism in India, the fundamental principles of capitalism were violated. There was no free market, so to speak. Political power was being used to interfere in the market. The free hand of the market was not there, and laissez-faire, well, the spirit was clearly missing. We also spoke about this yesterday. Just two separate points to be mentioned before we end this. One is that during the Second World War, then there was large repatriation of foreign capital, and India had a large balance of payment surplus, mainly due to massive wartime purchases of Indian goods by the British government for war purposes. Also, Amir Bagchi has pointed out that it was not just the British capitalists and industrialists, but American multinationals also penetrated deep into the Indian economy. So, all this happened, and many of these concerns continued their business even after independence. A lot of things, of course, changed only in 1991 when liberalization, privatization and globalization was introduced, because in between then we were pursuing more of a socialist policy based on the 5-year plans, and then things changed. So this is a broad overview of how colonialism spread its wings in India and put Indians under shackles. In the subsequent lessons, we will look at more of this and explore modern Indian history further. So if you have any questions about what we've covered so far, please put it in the comments and I'll make sure that I answer it. And I understand that some of you wanted some lessons on polity. But please understand that right now we are proceeding with modern Indian history. In due course, we will see if we can make videos and lessons on other important topics as well. If you have any specific queries, yes, you can always post them. We'll see what can be done about them. Thank you.